you can learn about issues that impact us every day. State of world, oh, one life.
Real people, real talk.
Made to help people in our community in every way. Boy, you're a girl, oh, one life.
Human trafficking. You've probably heard of that term, and you probably figured that's far removed from you. Well, actually, human trafficking is everywhere. You may have seen someone, say yesterday, maybe even today, who is a trafficked victim, but you didn't know it. You might say that it is hidden in plain sight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Beverly Taylor. This is the 411 Live. Real people, real talk. We are embarking on a multi-part project dealing with human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking, and also looking at the trauma that this causes people involved in it. We will be talking about this, different aspects of it, and our goal is to bring awareness and really get the conversation going. And that's where you come in. We want you to comment. We want you to ask questions. We want you to make suggestions. So continue to do that throughout this podcast. Today's topic, we will be dealing with sex trafficking and its impact on the family. This is a big one. And we have two fantastic people joining me now. Dr. Debbie Lassiter, who is the executive director and co-founder of Convergence Resource Center, and Lisa McCormick, who comes to us all the way from Tacoma, Wisconsin. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for traveling here. And she is the mother of a sex trafficked victim. And you're also a huge advocate for the awareness of human trafficking, correct?
Yes.
We have a lot to talk about. But let's go over some terms, because I find myself going back and forth using the term human trafficking and sex trafficking, and people may be going, well, what's the difference? But sex trafficking is a form of human trafficking. Is that a
That's
way
correct.
of it?
Yeah.
Go
So
ahead
sex
and
trafficking and labor trafficking are the two umbrella forms of human trafficking. Human trafficking involves the buying and selling of people to make them do what you want them to do using fraud, force, or coercion. So it can either be the sex trade or the labor trade, and then there are a bunch of little things that fall under those two umbrellas.
Right. Another distinction we should make right away, and that being prostitution and sex trafficking. Explain that.
So a lot of people disagree on this, but we really hold to that prostitution can be done of a person's own free will. If you decide that you want to make your living that way and there are no extenuating circumstances, there are people who fight for the right to be sex workers, and they would be very upset if you tried to stop them from doing that. Human trafficking or sex trafficking involves fraud, force, or coercion. Unless the person is under the age of 18 years old, then neither one of those have to be proven. If it's happening, it's automatically human trafficking.
All right. That's good. That's good. Now, the two of you have come together, and you have developed a program to help families of the trafficked person. When I heard this, my first thought was, I haven't heard of this before, because there are lots of programs out there for the victims and the survivors of sex trafficking, but I haven't heard anything to come alongside the family member of the loved ones. So is that the reason why you guys decided to do this?
Well, go ahead, Lisa.
I was just going to say that as a parent, when I went through all this with my son, there was nowhere to go. There were no resources out there. There were no organizations or anyone who could even help me and tell me what trafficking was and what my son had been through. So I really navigated that alone. And so I really made it my goal after my son's death that I was going to help other parents. And if that meant we had to create something, that's what we're going to do.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about how this works.
So for us, this was created. We're a victim-oriented organization. So all of our services come out of a need that we've seen with the people we're working with. So for us, we started hearing stories from the ladies that they had told their families what happened to them, and the families didn't respond. They just stared at them. So what they didn't understand was that the families are now in shock, and they don't know what to say to you. They don't know what to do. Unfortunately, some of them then said, well, I'm going back to my trafficker because at least he loves me. He hugged me. He kissed me. They didn't do anything. Or we heard stories from husbands, from boyfriends saying, I don't know how to help her. I don't know what to do, and so we saw all of this. So what we did was we developed this program, and it has two facets to it. And I know we'll get into a lot of that probably later on, but we work directly with one family at a time. So if you have, and working with the adult members of the family. Now, when we say family, we're not just talking about blood relatives. We're talking about loved ones. Your best friend might be the person who needs to come and get the help to know how to work with you.
Right.
Okay, and so what we do is we have a program that helps them understand what it is, what happened to you, and what psychologically is going on so that they don't make the mistakes to re-victimize by not even knowing they've done it.
Excellent. Okay. We're going to get into the program more a little bit later. But the other thing that impressed me about this is the two of you coming together. I think it's a good mix. I mean, you've been working with survivors of sex trafficking forever. I had a story to tell. Some may know that I was a reporter anchor for Fox 6 News for 21 years. But maybe 10 years ago, I guess it's been, I entered into a conversation with Debbie, and we talked about sex trafficking. And I went to one of the seminars, Epidemic in the Game. Mm-hmm. I was amazed. It was so eye-opening, and I ended up doing several reports dealing with sex trafficking, and that helped. You gave me the awareness so I could give the awareness to other people, because as we say, it's hidden in plain sight.
Yes, it is.
The other thing, so there's her expertise and everything, but man, you bring that knowledge. So families who come to you, they can look at you and go, she feels my pain. Mm-hmm. She's been where I've been.
Absolutely.
Lisa, if you would, kind of tell me about this road that you traveled with Jeffrey, your son.
Yeah, thank you. Jeffrey, being from rural Wisconsin, we really were not aware of what trafficking was. And if it was something, in a much bigger city than, small town America, And, but my son at the age of 11 started doing drugs and got involved in that at school. And continued on up until his freshman year of high school. He'd been a chronic runaway, and so we'd been struggling with that for several years. And then in January of 2016, he had been gone for about 6 weeks, and he'd called me and asked me to come pick him up. He was down in Madison, and we'd been through enough with his drug use and runaways that we knew not to just go pick him up. And so we set up an operation with the police to pick him up for us. And when the police officer picked him up, my son informed him that he had been with these men and that they had forced him to have sex with multiple women and had beat him up when he didn't do what was asked. He'd been kept in a drugged-up stupor the entire time, so thought he was only missing for about 2 weeks when it was 6 weeks. And so once we looked into the situation a little bit more, found out that these men were sexual predators. They were known by the police that they were doing this. And we found out that my son, pretty much was kept so drugged up during that time and forced to have sex. He had burn marks all up and down his arms. And so during that 6 weeks time, we brought my son out of that situation thinking that things would, we'll just get back on the regular track and get back into the help that he was getting. He was involved with the juvenile detention center program, up in our community. And so when he was brought to jail in Madison, he went to the juvenile detention center. And while he was there, he's now age 17, and that's considered an adult in Wisconsin. And so his traffickers had access to him while he was in jail, on the phone, visiting him. It took us about 3 days to kind of figure out who these men were, where we were able to stop all communication. We were able to transfer my son back up to La Crosse. And when we transferred my son up here, The men continued to have access to my son, writing letters, calling the jail, doing whatever they could to try to get access to him. During that time, they also started stalking our family. They were on social media, on Facebook, friend requesting, talking to us, trying to get us to help them out. They wanted to post bail for Jeffrey, although that wasn't needed. They tried to convince Jeffrey to be emancipated, which is illegal in the state of Wisconsin. They were just doing all those tactics and grooming tactics to get Jeffrey to do what they wanted him to do, and pull him away from the family. And so, we didn't understand what trafficking was back then, and didn't even the jail personnel and that just didn't understand what emotionally he'd been through. And so that evening that my son was brought back there, he attempted suicide, and we brought him to the hospital and tried to just get him more help. Right. And my son couldn't handle it. Things didn't move very quickly. And so my son jumped the fence and took off and ran away again. This time he ran straight back to the trafficker's home. And I like to kind of compare this to when my son was in middle school. He really struggled to fit in and try to find the right group of friends. And the only friends he could really connect with were those friends that were making the poor choices and doing the bad things in school. And so it's that's how my son felt about these traffickers. These were the people that cared about him. Even though he knew his family loved him, he knew that these people would take care of him and support him and
that connection.
Right. And they had convinced him that that's what was happening. And so my son went down there, and fortunately, the police found him. He was sitting on the porch of the home with a young girl. The two men were inside the home. When the police approached the home, my son jumped off the porch, ran down the alley, and when the police officer caught him, he unfortunately assaulted an officer. Now being an adult at 17, he went to adult jail for the next few months. During that 3 months that my son was in jail, again, the traffickers continued to have access to him. There was nothing I could do to stop the access they had. But in June of 2016, my son got out of jail and was home with us for about 9 days. And we thought things were back to normal. Things were looking great. And then one day he just disappeared again. That was the last time my daughter saw him alive. Over the next few months, he'd been running continuously, always down to Iowa. Really, at the time, couldn't understand the draw of Iowa. But what we found out later is that it was his channel. He was running from Madison to Sioux City, Iowa, and that's where they were trafficking up and down, selling him on Craigslist. He was dancing in clubs, trying to find people outside of clubs, whatever he could do during that time that he was there. But I really didn't find out how much my son was being trafficked until after his death. He passed away on September 30th, 2016 of a heroin fentanyl drug overdose. I believe very strongly that the traffickers paid for the hotel and paid for the drugs that he eventually died from. But unfortunately, we have no proof of that. So those men are still out there. But what we found out, though, is as I was planning my son's funeral, somebody brought an envelope of photos to the funeral home, and it said, "These are photos of your son from the last 4 months of his life." And inside the envelope were photos of my son with his traffickers. And I know what they look like because they stalked our family, and we saw photos of them, so we knew what they looked like. And the funeral home said, "Those photos are so graphic, don't show them to your mom." My daughters looked at them and agreed that I should not look at those photos. And I really didn't look at them until about 3 months after my son's death, and realized what I was looking at.
So I have to stop you right now because this is atrocious. They brought pictures to the funeral home to add to your pain.
Oh, it gets worse. They actually came to my son's funeral. The traffickers came to the visitation service. The gentleman that I kind of call the pimp, he's the top guy. He came in with a young woman on his arm who was just crying immensely and walked right in and shook my hand, and I knew instantly who he was. And he told us that he was Jeffrey's friend from Madison, and I knew instantly that he was the man. I asked him to be removed, and he graciously left, and I thought that was over with. And then the next day when we had the actual funeral service in the cemetery service there, it was just about over. I was really kind of in a fog that whole morning, and And at the service, my daughter kind of elbowed me and she says, "Mom, look to your right." And over to the right is a man. I kind of call him the middle in my terminology, but he's kind of the one of the workers. And he had this young man on his arm just tight, and the boy was crying quite a lot. And my gut just told me that he was telling this boy, "This is going to be you if you don't do what we say."
Wow. Wow. I'm going to get you to stop right there. This is riveting, and this is a tough time to take a break. But we're going to take a break. We're going to come back, and we're going to continue this conversation.
Human trafficking is a global issue that is happening locally. This is a problem that we cannot ignore.
Being so scared on that hotel bed and wish I had my mommy. Going back into that feeling of, man, what am I getting myself into?
She rests her head on the prison to which she's chained.
I'm standing there and I can't move. I can't go nowhere, I'm stuck.
Drug into this spider's web, and she can't untangle herself to freedom.
Him telling me how pretty I am and what I can do to trick guys out of money and what I need to do and how much money I need to bring back, and him making me change into different lingeries to take pictures of me to put me on Craigslist. Now I'm a product to be sold.
Beneath this ground we walk is a hell of movement in a forced direction. Gridlocked, traffic lights, sex, currency, bodies, stock, fear, monopolized, auction, blocks.
Another job, he come another one, and then just being sold over and over and over and over.
Minds groomed to be immune to pain.
And you used to it, and you just lay there.
Numb, desensitized, innocence, drained.
I went from that scared little girl, from in foster care, from being molested by my stepbrother, by my foster brother, till being a lonely little girl stuck in a house, so scared with my mother, to being trafficked.
Now, Lisa, when we left, we were at the cemetery, and the trafficker was there. And you said there was a young man on his arm bawling. What do you think that was about?
You know, my gut told me that he was telling this boy that this is going to be you if you don't do what we say. And my gut just knew that this young boy was being trafficked, just like my son was. And I knew right then and there that they were here. But it just doesn't even end there. We were looking out at the sea of hundreds and hundreds of people that were at the cemetery. And my daughter elbows me again and she says, "There's the other one." And this one we kind of call the bottom. And he's the one that's out there who is my son's friend. He was always the one trying to help my son call home, the one that was trying to help my son get a job and help him out a lot. And he was out in the sea of people and he was staring at us. And I swear to you, he never blinked. He just stared directly at us. And that's really when I fell apart. I did the whole ugly mom cry kind of thing. And I refused to leave. And I was crying so hard that nobody could understand me. And I think my family felt that I was afraid to leave him in the ground, that they were going to bury him, and I didn't want to leave my son there. But the thing that was making me so upset is I was never, ever going to let these men be near my son again. And there was no way that I was going to leave that cemetery with those men still having access to my son. And so when I finally could speak coherently, I told the funeral directors what was going on in my family, and they basically created a perimeter, standing there with their arms, on their hips and protecting us and giving us a clear path to leave. And the funeral directors told us that they just basically told everyone to leave. They weren't welcome at the luncheon. You needed to go home, and the family did not want you here. And so they made sure that was completely clear before they buried my son.
There's so many elements to that story, but one thing that surprises me, I get it with a sex trafficker threatening and forcing and beating their victim. But here, now the victim, Jeffrey, has died, and they're still doing this to the family, victimizing the family. I don't understand.
Because the trafficker sets himself up as pimp God, which means that he wants his victims to believe that, or she wants the victim to believe that they can do anything. So possibly when they knew what had happened, they told them, we have the power to do this. We can make this happen to you if you don't do what we tell you to do. It's all psychological manipulation. So even though, and they would have said things like, we'll make your family go through this. We'll make your family feel this. So just as Lisa mentioned about telling them similar things like, this is going to happen to you, I can make this happen to you even if I'm not in the same state as you. If you run away, I can make this happen from where I am.
Right.
So they want them to believe they have these godlike powers that they don't have.
Oh, my goodness. So, Lisa, what gave you the strength, after all that you've been through, to say, okay, I'm going to not only make my story public, but I'm going to go here, 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 everywhere I can to help somebody else through my pain?
I get asked that a lot. Where do you get your strength from? And I have a very strong faith. I believe strongly that God has led me to where I need to be to do this. But, truly when Jeffrey was alive, both of us said, we're going to write a book about this one day. He had written 4 books while he was in jail. He had written his autobiography. He had titles done. He had artwork done. He'd even called a publisher before he died. He was ready to do this. And so we always knew that we would share our story someday. He had really hoped that he would be able to walk onto his high school graduation and be able to tell his classmates that I'm a recovering addict and I'm here to share my story with you. And unfortunately, he passed away his senior year of high school. But I just knew that this is what the plan was, that we needed to do this. And I think that moment at that funeral when those men were there, I knew that no way was I ever going to let another family go through what I went through. I navigated that alone, and I just did not want another family to ever have to do that. And if me going out speaking and talking and sharing our story can help one person and help another family so they don't feel alone, that's what I'm here for.
As you're hearing Lisa's story, if you have comments, questions, please jot them down, send them to us, because we really want to hear what you have to say as well, because I'm sure that you're having some of the same reactions that I'm having. So we would love to hear your comments and see those comments. So send them our way. So with all of this, as you go from place to place telling your story, and Debbie, you do this too, but are you finding that people are really, I'll say naive, because the mindset is, this could never happen to my child, my daughter, my son?
I think one of the things that's really remarkable also about Lisa's story is that many times we forget that a trafficking victim can be male.
Yes.
And we forget that they can be young men. And when we think about them being young men, we automatically think about them sleeping with men. But they were forcing him to sleep with women.
Yes.
And so that helps us broaden the scope of that trafficking can happen to anybody. And we need to take the blinders off a little bit. But I think naive is one word, but another word is just completely unaware. Mm-hmm. We live in bubbles. And if it's not in my bubble that I can see, it really isn't real.
Right.
And so this really bursts those bubbles for you to help you realize that it's happening everywhere.
And it's interesting that you say that, because I was thinking, as she was telling her story, I was thinking, boy, this shatters a lot of things, because, okay, we have a white boy, and he is being sold to women in rural Wisconsin. It's not in Milwaukee. So it just busts a lot of the myths or the thinking that we have. Is it hard to get people to see that this is happening maybe in your neighborhood, maybe down your street? Is it hard to convince people of this?
I think when I go out and speak, it's kind of like deer in the headlights. A lot of the people, you think you're doing good work and you're out there talking and sharing it, and then you talk to a group and they're so clueless. They just don't understand or unaware, like you said. And so that just means we've got that much more work to do, that we've got to get out there and talk and share our story with more people. But yes, we are definitely I feel like I'm so different and unique, that how it affected the family. That doesn't happen in every situation. The way my son was, got into the ring and got doing all of that is very unique. And so when I first started speaking with others, I actually kind of felt like we were confusing our audiences because my story was so different than theirs. And the other victims and survivors started telling me that that's how unique and different this is. I only knew my story.
Right.
But now that I've been working with all these other people and hearing these other stories, I realize it is so unique and different. And that's why it's hidden. That's why we can't just arrest them all and get them into jail, because it's so unique and different. And it really takes us educating everyone to understand that it's going to take all of us in order to stop the demand as well as stop the traffickers from doing what they're doing.
The other thing, talking to your story, were you about to say something?
I did want to ask you a question. We're hearing a lot of how it affected you, but Jeffrey had siblings. And could you just talk a little bit about how it affected the more extended part of the family?
Yeah, definitely. I have 2 other daughters, and they are affected very much. So my oldest used to be a very outgoing, bubbly, very, very adventurous person, and she really has become quite an introvert. She doesn't like public attention. This is a girl who's always done choirs and show choir and theater and that kind of thing, and now suddenly she wants no attention on her at all. She doesn't like what is being brought upon her due to her brother. And then my middle daughter suffers quite a bit of anxiety. When those traffickers were coming after our family and stalking them on social media, we started hearing stories from police and other people that, they come to your communities, they research and look at your community because they're looking for the most vulnerable person. And so they're going to come in and look at our community and our family and find out what can they do to pull Jeffrey further away from their family.
Yeah.
And so she was petrified that they were going to come to her home. And if somebody parks on our street to take their lunch break or to answer their phone, she's on the phone calling the police because there's somebody outside her home. I mean, she's extremely anxious and nervous, and it's taken quite a toll on the 2 of them. They're gradually working their way out of that, but yeah, it's definitely taken a huge toll on our entire family.
It really trickles down. It's just not the victim, but there's so many victims.
Yes, because in a lot of cases, the children are aware of what's going on. I mean, younger children. I'm talking about tender age children, and no one's helping them with it. So we need to make sure that we remember them as well.
That's why your program is so on target, so needed, and so unique in this community. But I'm thinking that it's going to expand tremendously as people listen in and want to get more about it. Now, this episode, we've run out of time. So they're going to stay with me for part 2, and we're going to have a separate episode because we have a lot of things to talk about. We still want to delve into the program and how it can affect families and the impact that sex trafficking is having on families. We want to talk a little bit more about that and some of the warning signs, and man, there's just a lot to discuss. So we are going to end this episode. I want to thank you both for being here. Again, they're going to stick around, so there will be a part 2, so you need to stick around for that. Tune in for that. Now, we will put more information on what we've talked about on our website, that being www.the411live.org. You can also tune in to Facebook. You will find us there. Go to our YouTube channel, of course, and check us out on Twitter and also IGTV. We have all of those sources, so you go there. Of course, we are a nonprofit organization, so when you go to our website, if you'd like to donate, we would greatly appreciate that. We hope that you enjoyed our podcast, and we hope that you will stick around for much more, especially part 2 of this one. So until then, I will just say that this is, well, I'm Beverly Taylor, and this is the 411 Live. Real people, real talk.